So the educational issue that I'm looking at today is standardized testing, which I have mentioned, I think, more than once in the classroom. Kind of scares the hell out of me, so this seemed like a useful opportunity to look into that. Now, why does it exist? From what I found, I suppose it has technically and historically existed in some form for centuries and centuries now. But as the problematic factor in American education that I'm referring specifically to, it began before this, but it was really solidified in 2002 when George W. Bush signed the No Child Left Behind Act, at which point annual standardized testing became kind of a universal norm in American public schools as a means of rating students and their schools and their teachers. Now it's listed on the Act itself as an attempt to, let's see here, close the achievement gap with accountability, flexibility, and choice so that no child is left behind. Which, the hell does that even mean? But still, good to know. Thanks, Act. So why is this a problem? Well, I found in my research more than a few issues taken with standardized testing. I mean, I guess, unsurprisingly, a lot of people talk about it right now. So there was a lot out there, in any number of scholarly articles on every single facet. It's kind of overwhelming, useful, but overwhelming. Now, because I'm not sure that I'll have any near enough time to cover every single issue that I came across, I think I'll address those concerns that seem most consistently raised and that I'm fairly certain will affect me and probably some others who are attempting to teach in the United States. Those are, kind of a quick list here that I found. Student anxiety comes up a lot. Concerns with equality and equity in the classroom, fairly common. This notion of teaching to the test and what that offers, if anything, which it doesn't seem most people think that it does. Let's see, the potential inability to address, and from what I found, this kind of comes down and relates pretty strongly to equality in the classroom, but the inability for standardized testing to address student disabilities. Those came up, so let's see what I found. So student anxiety, from my research, is definitely of some concern to teachers and researchers both. Now, from what I found, and I read this interesting article on procon.org, which if you've never checked out, has a lot of cool articles. They do a lot of research for people, exploring the pros and cons of various topics that show up both in American politics and a bunch of stuff. But anyway, I found this interesting article that listed the Stanford 9 exam as coming with instructions on what to do with the test in case of a student throwing up on it during the course of their exam. That was interesting because, assuming that's true, and I'd really like to find a copy to find out, that would seem to offer some support for educators and researchers' concerns that anxiety and stress, can and often do lead to crying and vomiting and all these crazy high-stress reactions to these tests from students, which certainly will affect student performance, but, well, I don't think I want to do anything that gave that reaction to anybody, least of all because vomit's not, well, is by its very nature kind of unappealing. Anyway, moving on to equality and equity. Now, while preparing for this, I actually read an article in which a teacher raised some fairly valid and specific concerns about equality of resources and access within her schools, and its impact on her students' performance, or at least how it looks like they perform on these standardized tests. Now, she pointed out that she teaches in a fairly rural district that doesn't quite have the same access to resources that suburban schools do. She points out, let me look here, I made some notes, that suburban areas and might have access to like written only or writing only curriculums or grammar only curriculums, that they have these very specific classes and curriculums that students have access to. But that's not something that she is offered. So in her one class, she's forced to teach literature and grammar, writing, spelling when possible, because at her school specifically, students don't necessarily have access to technology that would afford them, spell checking on the fly like many students might have. Now she, in spite of this unequal access to these resources and curriculum, her students are being held to the same standards and are being compared to these students. They're being held accountable for their performance as relates to those suburban students. Now, because of that, in comparison, her teaching is going to be held accountable and judged less fit than her suburban counterparts, which she doesn't think is a fair assessment. So I guess the issue here is that these tests are written without regard for students of diverse backgrounds, and instead address what some critics, especially those that I found on the pro-con website, are listing as a white, abled majority. Now this is also where special education fits in, because from what I read, and I don't know if this is limited to on a school by school or teacher by teacher or even district by district basis, but special education students are made to take the exact same tests that other students are made to take in the classroom for the standardized testing, and potentially might not receive any, and at best sometimes few, of the accommodations that are supposed to be afforded them by their IEPs, which seems problematic, especially in particularly high stakes testing where performance on these exams may or may not directly influence whether a student graduates or moves forward in a grade. And it seems bizarre that those things wouldn't be taken into account. Anyway, problematic, certainly. So as far as teaching to the test is concerned, let's just move on again, because this feels like it's taken a while. A handful of issues were pretty consistently raised in my readings. The biggest argument here that I found is simply that this method of teaching only offers students access to test-taking skills, things like rote memorization and the ability to address and answer multiple-choice questions, which will totally raise test-taking scores, which unfortunately is the only thing that these students, teachers, and schools are being held accountable for due to standardized testing. But they don't really reflect, or at least they certainly don't have to reflect, actual improvement or learning. Instead, students are being rewarded for memorizing facts that are isolated to whatever they're told is going to be on the exam, which narrows their curriculum and potentially ignores any real learning at all. Instead, again, they're just being rewarded for rote memorization, which is, useful, but how many standardized tests, I guess, do you take after high school after high school alone? But I think in college I've only taken the GRE and here soon the Praxis. Outside of that, I won't really expect to encounter it again. Anyway, so I guess how useful can it be, right? So what can be done to help fix the problem? From my estimate, based on my research, finding and implementing an alternate means of student assessment and evaluation would be pretty useful. Would be a pretty useful means of addressing and fixing standardized testing in America. From what I've found, and this serves, it would seem, as a supplement to standardized testing, it doesn't actually get rid of it, which I think, unfortunately, might be impossibly hard, and even this would be difficult. But dynamic testing formats seem to be gaining some popularity in my research, and these intend to provide information about students' learning ability and methods of teaching strategies or methods of teaching and strategies that seem to work well with individual students. Let's see. It also takes into account the effects of student anxiety on performance, which, as mentioned above, will certainly affect it. So how does dynamic testing work? From my research, from what I've gathered, it works in 3 stages. I'm not even looking at the camera. Right there, 3 stages. The first is the pre-test stage, followed then by the mediation stage, and finally by the post-test stage. Now, during the pre-test, students are given a standardized exam in whatever area or areas might be the norm for this particular classroom or grade, in which they are assessed normally. Now, that's followed then by the mediation stage, where teachers go over this pretest and its results with the student, and they now work with them individually to address and work on the problem areas noted in the pretest. So all the things that they had difficulty with, students are now having addressed by teachers. In this stage, last week's, I guess it was hard for me to find how long this particular stage went on. I guess it varies by teacher and test. I'm not entirely sure, but that's followed then by the post-test. Now in the post-test, the students are given another standardized test, I guess meaning that the information that they're being tested on is being held to that, whatever that standard is. But in this test, they're only being tested on the things they worked on in the mediation phase. So all of their problem areas. And they're now being assessed almost solely on their learning and their ability to improve and show progress in these areas. So they're not competing anymore against, high access, white majority suburban students with individualized curriculums and specialized training. They're competing with themselves. They're just trying to do better than they had done. They're trying to prove that they have gained learning and understanding and made progress in these specific areas, which seems pretty useful both to students and teachers. Teachers now will be, I can only imagine they'll still be judged based upon their students' performance, which is the only real reflection of their effective teaching, I guess. But now, instead of being compared to, I guess, other teachers, well, they'll still be compared to other teachers, but instead of being compared based on their students' performance in correlation to, like that teacher mentioned earlier, those same, high access students should be judged, or he or she would be, she would be judged solely on her students' improvement and learning factors that she had far more control over than her school's resources and equity and access. Now, that said, any major change to standardized testing in the United States would be absurdly expensive and difficult to implement, as those changes are likely going to be fought by those major non-profit Big 3 organizations whose profits depend solely upon the use of their products in American schools. Ignoring this, which we can't really do, but that I guess I have to move forward here, I think a lot of the cost would come in the form of teachers' effort. Still these tests would have to be purchased by schools from companies, so maybe that's the end. These standardized testing companies just change the test. Maybe that's the way, and I'm not sure how easy that would be to implement. But outside of that, the real cost would come in the form of active participation and efforts from the teachers themselves, because it seems to me that the bulk of value in this dynamic assessment approach comes from the mediation phase, the ability for teachers to help students make real progress in the classroom, to come up with these individualized learning experiences that will really help students focus on the things they're having an issue with and how to improve them.